If I compare, well, if I look at the record before this one, 2005, the acetylene, how do you, there was critics say, or people say, a lot of anger involved, political anger maybe also. Was there still some of that anger left in this album?
Yeah, I think it's sort of, this album's a little bit like the hangover after the anger, you know, it's the aftermath of the anger. It's more when you start to think about like okay, now we got the anger out of our system, but there's still, you know, now you start to think about things. And, you know, the characters in these songs are, you know, having a lot of internal, let's say, monologues with themselves. You know, it's a lot of like weighing the world. It's not so, let's say, maybe clear as, you know, of emotions as when you're just angry. You know, this is quite out front. This is quite transparent, and here I think the characters they're not more ambiguous or ambivalent. I think it's just that they're weighing lots of things. You know, there's lots of thought process going on about, you know, where they are in the world and what's happening in the world. But I would say that the anger has not vanished. You know, it's just sort of put in a different place.
What do you think, maybe if you look from your point of view, that maybe when you're settled, you have your own small area where you feel comfortable in, does the anger come out then in a different way, or do you have maybe a little bit more to protect than just be angry? Is it something that you have experienced?
Well, I think you know, I think when you talk about, you know, there's different kinds of reactions to things. I think you can be angry about the world and still have a relatively, let's say, peaceful and satisfying and happy personal life. You know, because the world is not always, you know, banging on our door, but, you know, I think as responsible people in the world, we're you know, obligated to some point to think about, you know, what's happening outside this door a little bit, and when that starts to happen, that's when the anger comes, you know, because it's not, a lot of it does seem just really absolutely absurd and really, you know, quite a bit out of our control in some ways, but that doesn't make it any. That doesn't give us the excuse, I think, just to ignore it, you know.
Can you name one thing for yourself in particular that is still, that breaks your thoughts, or where you have a lot of thoughts over, that still now in this stage of your life?
Well, I think when we start, you know, I think it's, you know, I mean, we could talk about specific things and specific issues. I think a lot of it is just the idea that people are just in denial of a lot of things.
Can you name one specific thing?
Well, I mean, if we talk about, you know, things like the environment, you know, I mean, it's a harder thing, I think, from the European perspective to understand. But as Americans, you know, we're fundamentally dealing with politicians that are basically in denial that things like climate change even exist. Now, whether they believe that or not, that themselves, behind closed doors, I wonder. But they're certainly manipulating people with these thoughts, you know, and we're not talking about like right-wing lunatics. We're talking about really mainstream, you know, political people. It's worrisome. It's absolutely worrisome. You know, if you do polls in the United States, you know, 45% of all people think there's no climate change.
And do you think that's different in Europe?
I absolutely think it's different here. Yeah, I think you have, you know, it's not a question of, you know, there's plenty of problems in Europe. I mean, I live in Europe. I live in Slovenia, so I have some perspective on let's say, the collective of you know, Europe and what people think. I mean, of course, Europe is very different from place to place, also. But I think some basic things in European societies are sort of negotiated in advance that we seem to have in America, just, you know, that become completely controversial, like, you know, healthcare for people, you know, and basic environmental regulations and things like that. You know, these things are not just like universally accepted in America. This is still controversial. This is still being debated every day. You know, here, you know, even let's say, you know, left and right, they tend to agree upon these things to some extent. You know, there's some middle where these things are still not being like thrown around like, you know, like or shot at each other like bullets all the time. You know.